Hello, YouTube fam. Welcome to Talking Crime. My name is Jeannie Marie Bova, and this is where I like to come to discuss solved and unsolved true crime cases, as well as true crime facts and stats, and missing person cases that I don't think have gotten enough attention from mainstream media. If you're interested in everything true crime, then you have definitely come to the right place. I hope you will choose to subscribe to my channel, and if you click that little bell next to the subscribe button, YouTube will notify you whenever I upload new content. Quick warning before we get started, my videos are not for children. They are also not for those with weak stomachs or those who are easily triggered. I do not censor my language, and many of the details I give and photos that I show are graphic in nature, so viewer discretion is most definitely advised. Today I'm going to talk to you about a serial killer from the 1800s in England. It's a little different than my normal storytelling, but I was fascinated by this and by the fact that it took so long for anybody to realize what was going on. She got hers in the end, but how many had to suffer and die in order for it to come to that? This is the story of Mary Ann Cotton, who was actually born Mary Ann Robson, but she later changed her name. And hang on, it's a bumpy ride. So Mary Ann was born October 31st, 1832 in County Durham in England. Apparently she was a pretty regular kid. When she was growing up, there was really not much to show what she would become. There were no indicators. Nobody could have predicted that she would have turned into the monster that she did. Her Sunday school said that she was, quote, most exemplary and a regular attender, and they added that she was clean and tidy, which was a distinguishing factor from her fellow classmates, which to me means that her fellow classmates were a bunch of filthy ass kids, and apparently she was not, so yay her. Anyway, her early years were spent in Low Moorsley, but her parents decided to move to Merton Village in County Durham when she was around 8 years old. So when she was 14, her family received the devastating news that her father had died at work. He was a mine worker. He had fallen 150 feet to his death. He did die upon impact, so no suffering. However, it was still a complete shock to the family. And they knew that their lives were going to change, but they had no idea how much and how quickly, okay? And I don't know if this is how things were done in the 1800s in England, or if this was just a rare case or whatever, but either way, this is bullshit. But his body was arrived to his wife, his widow, Mary Ann's mom, received this body of her husband, her dead husband, in a fucking sack, like a burlap sack, and it had a stamp on it that said property of the South Hetton Coal Company, which is where he worked. Now, she received the body. She didn't even have time to mourn, okay? And then she got an eviction notice on top of that. The eviction notice is because, okay, the home that they were staying in was provided to them by the coal company that her father, Mary Ann's father, worked for. With the job came a place to live. Now that he was dead and he was no longer working there, they needed that house for people who were employed with them. So immediately after the funeral, they were expected to move the fuck out. So it was just one thing after another, after another. Now, just over a year later, Mary Ann's mom was ready to remarry already. As soon as her mom got remarried, Mary Ann realized she was not going to get along with the new stepfather, whose name was George Scott. Scott also was a miner, and he wasn't willing to really make things work with Mary Ann either. They were both hard-headed, and they just refused to get along. So Mary Ann decided that she was going to leave home at the age of 16. So she moved to a nearby village called South Hetton, and she decided to start a career as a nurse while she was living with a guy named Edward Potter, who was the manager of a colliery. After 3 years of working as a nurse, though, she went back home to her mom's house and she became a dressmaker. I guess back then you didn't need college to become a nurse. Anyways, when she was 20, Marianne married her first husband, a man named William Mowbray. He was a coal mine worker as well. Just after their wedding, the couple moved to Plymouth, Devon. Marianne and William unofficially had 9 children, though 8 of them died of gastric fever, supposedly, and weren't even registered. Like, there was no birth certificate. Essentially, the couple lost almost all of their children to gastric fever, is what it was called. But neither the births nor the deaths of these children were ever registered. Of all of their children, the couple had 1 daughter with her birth actually recorded in 1856. Her name was Margaret Jane, and she also died at 4 years old, though. By 1961, Marianne had another daughter with the same name as the baby that just died at 4 years old, as well as a son named William soon after, who also died of gastric fever. Concurrently, her husband William was working on a steam vessel as a foreman when he was diagnosed with an intestinal problem, and he died a couple weeks after as well. Now, the company where William worked covered his and his children's life insurance. So after his death, Marianne received a nice little piece of change. The equivalent of about half a year's wages back then. And after the death of her husband and her newly enriched bank account, Marianne moved to Seaham Harbor, where she met another man, and this man's name was Joseph Natras. And though they started a serious relationship, Natras was actually already engaged to another woman, and he ended up dumping Marianne to marry the woman that he was actually engaged to, so Marianne quickly moved on. Once they broke up, though, Marianne decided to move again, and she moved and started a new job at Sunderland Infirmary. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. At that point, she only had 2 daughters alive, total. And eventually one of the 3-year-old daughters also died. So she only had 1 daughter now. At this point, she has 1 kid left. And I know it's freaking confusing. I'm confused, and I've researched it twice and written it and recorded it a million times, and I'm still confusing myself. So I apologize if you're getting confused. So out of all of these kids, she's got 1 left now. And she decided this one was too much for her to handle, so she took this 1 child and sent this daughter to go live with her mom while she was focusing on her career at the infirmary. Okay, so out of all these kids, she only had 1 left, and she didn't even want to raise that one. Now, during her time working at the infirmary, Marianne met a man named George Ward. Ward was an engineer who was actually a patient at the infirmary at the time that they met. The two started a relationship and got married in August of 1865. Now, Ward was still ill, but his doctor expected him to live quite a while, but instead he died fairly quickly after he got with Marianne. They got married, and they were married for not even a year when he died of intestinal problems, is what they called it. It's believed that, yes, he was still ill. Yes, he might have had typhoid or English cholera, but things were looking pretty questionable to his actual doctor because he didn't think, like I said, he was going to die so quickly. He was questioning it, but didn't go any further at this time. So now yet another husband is gone. Now Marianne, again unfazed, again collected the insurance money from now the second husband's death, and she goes on with her life like nothing happened. Um, there was a man named James Robinson. He was a widower. He had 3 children, and he worked as a shipbuilder. Now, in November, he had hired Mary as his housekeeper. Only 1 month after Mary Ann joined the family as the housekeeper, one of Robinson's children died. The cause of the child's death was considered gastric fever, which was coincidentally, obviously, the same exact thing that 90% of her own children had died from, but he didn't know about that. He found himself all kinds of tore up and in pieces, and conveniently, there was Mary Ann as a shoulder to cry on. And obviously, then they got married. Mary Ann ends up becoming pregnant with his child. Not very long after, Mary Ann received the news that her mom had fallen ill, and she went to go and visit her mom. Now, she wasn't all that sick, but she was kind of sick, okay? But only 9 days after she showed up with her mom dies. Intestinal issues. Mary Ann decided to go ahead and take her daughter, Isabella, who she had sent to her mom a couple years before, to come and live with her and Robinson's remaining 2 children, and then her and her husband, Robinson. Once again, not very long after Isabella joined the household, she started complaining of severe stomach pains. She died, along with Robinson's 2 remaining children. All 3 of them. They died suddenly in April of that year. Mary Ann collected a life insurance payment for her daughter Isabella, which was still linked to her previous marriage. She received about a third of what she had received for her husband, so her bank account should have been doing pretty well at this point. All these kids just dying and nobody saying anything about it. But anyways, March 1868, Mary Ann and her new husband were doing fine until he got sick. Well, she gets pregnant again. She has their second child in 69, and during their marriage, she begins pressuring him to get some insurance for himself because, you're kind of sickly lately, and I just don't want to be left with nothing if you were to die. Now, she tried to be subtle, but it was constant nagging about the life insurance, and that brought some suspicions up for Robinson, and he eventually started investigating on his own. And he found some mind-blowing facts. He found that she was extremely in debt, that she had stolen money from him and was still extremely in debt. He found out about her kids that had passed away before, her husbands that had passed away before, and so he managed to get out with his life somehow and took her to court and won full custody of their son, George, which was the only child she had left. I believe she might have had a daughter still. I don't think so, though. But she did have George, who he got custody of, and he got out with his life and a divorce. Mary Ann wasn't expecting her life to take such a turn for the worse. I mean, after all, she always seemed to get out of it with money in her pocket and freedom to do whatever the hell she wanted. And this time she found herself living out on the streets because he literally threw her out of the house. Now, one of her friends that she had at the time had a brother, and she introduced Mary Ann to her brother. His name was Frederick Cotton. He was another recent widower. He lived in Walbottle, Northumberland. At the time that he met Mary Ann, he had already lost 2 of his 4 children. Frederick's sister Margaret had been acting as mother figure for the remaining 2 children. And then all of a sudden, Margaret, Mary Ann's friend, dies of some sort of stomach problem, leaving Frederick Cotton unconsolable. Mary Ann found that grieving moment is perfect time to swoop in and take care of Frederick and his children. She eventually became pregnant with his child, and this time experiencing her 12th, 13th pregnancy. Little did Cotton know that she had, what, 10 of the 11 previous children were all dead, plus her stepchildren were dead. He didn't even know about the living child that was with her ex-husband. They got married in 1870. They had their son Robert at the beginning of 1871. And just after this child was born, Marianne receives news from a previous lover. You remember Joseph Natras? Well, apparently he got a divorce from that woman that he left her to go marry. And now he was only living 30 miles away. So now she decides, she's going to go pursue an extramarital affair with this guy. So now she's cheating on her new husband with a guy from the past, even to the point where she convinced her husband to move homes to be closer to her side piece without him even knowing that that's what he was doing. And he decided to go ahead and move them over there. So now she lives right next door to her side piece. Yeah. Now he agreed to move. He remained clueless about Marianne's extramarital affair. And of course, he was completely unaware that his own life was just about to end. Within a couple of months of moving, Frederick got this stomach bug, and all of a sudden he died. After his death, Marianne got a job in the area as a nurse and agreed with Natras that they should move in together. So Natras, her neighbor, packed his bags, moved next door into Marianne's house, where she had quite recently just lost her husband at. Now she was at work. She was introduced to a case of a patient who was suffering from smallpox, and she was urgently required as being the nurse. She was assigned to that case and found herself nursing an officer named John Manning. Now, his actual name was Richard Mann, but she was told his name was John Manning, so we're just going to go with that, okay? Now, her and this John Manning with the smallpox or whatever are having an affair as well. So now she's having an affair. She gets pregnant. Soon after she gets pregnant, her son from her marriage with Frederick died. Mary Ann had managed to convince Natras to make changes to his will to include her as a beneficiary, making sure that his life insurance would cover her just in case he dies. He had no idea that she was pregnant with another man's child, no less, and then all of a sudden his unexpected death arrived. He died of a sudden gastric fever, leaving a large part of his estate to Marianne and also enabling her to collect on his life insurance. Marianne's downfall began when parish official named Thomas Riley approached her for help in nursing a woman who had fallen ill with smallpox. Marianne replied that Charles Edward, who was the last surviving son of Frederick Cotton, would be in her way if she were to take the job. Therefore, she asked Riley if it would be okay for the boy to be committed to a workhouse. Riley rejected this and explained that he was just too young for that. And so to this, Marianne replied, quote, "I won't be troubled long. He'll go like all the rest of the Cottons," unquote. According to Marianne, the boy was already terminally sick and wasn't going to live much longer anyway, so she could take the job. And within 5 days, Charles Cotton, the little boy, was found dead. And Thomas Riley instinctively felt like things didn't add up and asked the local doctor to delay completing the boy's death certificate till he was able to investigate the circumstances of his death. Now, finally, somebody with a brain, right? Like, after all these kids and all these husbands, family members, and friends are all just dropping dead around her, finally somebody says, hey, something's a little fishy here. So a couple of days after Charles died, Marianne went to the insurance office. She planned to collect her payment and was surprised to discover that no payment would be issued unless she had a death certificate. Now, a jury had been appointed to the investigation. about Charles's death, and they had concluded that he had died from unnatural causes, that he was given arrowroot. Now, Marianne justified it by claiming that she used the arrowroot to relieve the boy from pain caused by his supposed illness, but they couldn't find any illness. She added that Riley had started an investigation and made all of these accusations against her because she rejected him. But because the story still didn't add up, local newspapers caught on. And one of the few times that the local newspapers were a benefit, they actually started rumors like they tend to do, and rumors about her mother, husbands, friends, lover, and total of 11 or 12 kids had all dropped dead around her from some strange stomach issue. And they also didn't like the fact that she had moved so many times around London in such a short amount of time. So the rumors in the newspaper resulted in an actual police investigation. And the doctor who had been attending to Charles Cotton when she had met him, his doctor at that time, he had kept several samples with him that concluded that his body contained arsenic. Now, after the police found about this, an arrest warrant was made. Marianne was charged with Charles's murder, but because she was pregnant at the time and because a problem with the selection of the prosecution counsel arose, the trial had been delayed. Now, on January 10th, 1873, Marianne gave birth to a daughter, Margaret Edith Quick Manning Cotton. No longer pregnant, her trial was able to start in March of that same year. Now, the Attorney General's protege, Charles Russell, being appointed as the prosecutor of the case, started the trial. And this would be the first of many high-profile poisoning cases that Russell would be working on throughout his career, but most of which had to do with Marianne. Her defense attorney, Mr. Thomas Campbell Foster, argued that Charles Cotton had died from inhaling arsenic that had been used as a dye found in the green wallpaper at the family home. Yet she lived in the same home and she did not get sick. I think they breathed the same air. But anyways, after all of the prosecution's and defense's arguments were laid out, the jury left the courtroom and it only took them 90 minutes to discuss the case and come back with a guilty verdict. Marianne was apparently devastated with the result and then showed no emotion again. So it was like that long that she was human for a second. And then she went back to cold-hearted and didn't give a fuck. They finally hung this bitch in March 1873 in Durham County. And of all 13 of Marianne's children, only 2 survived. Her son George from her earlier marriage to James Robinson, and her youngest child, Margaret Edith, who was just born while she was locked up. They hung the bitch, thank God. Don't know how Frederick Cotton, his son, George, and I don't know how those 2 managed to escape with their lives, but I'm glad they did. There were probably others in her life that died, and since people were dying from these illnesses anyway, it was just kind of expected, so nobody looked into it. But at the minimum, she took out 16, 17 people. At the minimum. Most of which being her own children. And she had not a fuck to give about it either. They were just in her way. They were a means to an end. A means to get the guy. And then they were in her way. And she cheated on everybody. She used everybody. And she killed everybody that she could. And just kept on going like it was just another day. I had never heard of this woman. But it seems to me that she killed more people than the majority of today's serial killers. And I've never even heard of her. I don't know about you. Have you ever heard of her? Let me know down in the comments section. And let me know what you think of this case. Do you like that I'm doing cases from overseas? Do you like that I'm doing cases that happened so long ago? Or should I get back to the obscure and little known cases just from the US? Give me an idea of what you guys are wanting. If you have any case suggestions, throw those down in the comment section as well. Don't forget, I reply to every comment that is left for me, good, bad, or indifferent. And so I look forward to see what all you have to say. I am working on another case as we speak, so that should be uploaded here in the next couple of days. I look for that. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. And make sure you hit that little bell so that YouTube lets you know when the next episode comes out, because you're going to want to see this one. It's even better than the one I did today. And this one here today was confusing as fuck to me. Honest. I probably confused at least half of you. I apologize, but there were just so many... Well, there were just so many children and so many people that got murdered by this bitch. And if it happened so long ago, so the information that I got offline when I was doing the research had different conflicting dates and ages and time frames and even towns, kids' names, the whole nine. So I didn't even mention most of the children's names for that reason, because I could not find a source that I could 100% put faith into. So I apologize if this was hella confusing, because it kind of was for me too, but I did all that research and I found it extremely interesting, confusion aside, and I was hoping that maybe you guys would find it interesting as well. So if you did, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. I thank you for sticking through this confusing ass episode, and I hope to see you again in the next couple of days. Till then, y'all stay safe out there.